November 2nd, 2025, 4:37 a.m. Over the foggy plains of Luhansk, a silent shape glided through the darkness. Radar screens barely flickered as a single Ukrainian FP-2 drone cut across 120 miles of occupied territory. Seconds later, impact. A Russian fuel depot erupted in flames, its shockwave visible for miles. Two more strikes followed, this time on warehouses and logistics hubs that fed Moscow's army in eastern Ukraine. Within minutes, 3 separate Russian supply lines were severed. This wasn't a missile strike. It wasn't even an air raid. It was a new kind of warfare. Cheap, fast, and nearly unstoppable. The FP-2 drone had arrived, and with it, Ukraine had redrawn the rules of modern combat. Each FP-2 costs just $55,000, less than the price of a single guided bomb. Yet it carries a warhead of 231 pounds, enough to devastate entire command centers. Designed by Kiev-based defense innovator Firepoint, the FP-2 bridges the gap between short-range FPV drones and long-range cruise missiles. Its range, 200 kilometers or about 124 miles, means no Russian base behind the lines is safe anymore. Ukrainian operators can launch it from disguised trucks, punch in GPS coordinates, and watch the drone steer itself toward its target, or control it manually like a precision-guided FPV. Within seconds of arrival, the explosion leaves behind nothing but confusion and silence. By the time Russian commanders realized what was happening, the Alpha Special Forces of Ukraine's security service had already executed multiple precision strikes, crippling key fuel reserves and ammunition hubs. Moscow's troops were suddenly cut off, starved of supplies, information, and fuel. And then, the unthinkable happened. The weapon that Russia dismissed as a toy turned into the most disruptive threat to its war machine since the start of the invasion. Could a $55,000 drone really collapse billions of dollars worth of Russian infrastructure? Could this be the moment the balance of the war truly shifts? The roots of this technological breakthrough trace back to the earliest days of the invasion. In 2022, when Russia's tanks rolled across Ukraine's borders, Kyiv was outgunned, outnumbered, and outspent. But Ukraine had something Moscow didn't: creativity. From the first months of the war, Ukraine's defense industry began reinventing the battlefield, turning commercial drones into guided missiles and coding new flight algorithms faster than Russia could respond. Firepoint, a small Ukrainian startup, emerged as one of the brightest stars in this asymmetric revolution. Its engineers, many of them former software developers and gamers, began designing low-cost, modular systems that could be built in secret workshops far from the front lines. Their first creation, the FP-1, gave Ukraine a long-range strike option capable of hitting targets over 1,200 kilometers away, deep inside Russia. But in 2025, a different need emerged. Ukraine had won several key victories along the Eastern Front, reclaiming parts of Donetsk and Zaporizhia. Yet Russia's mid-range strongholds, fuel depots, coordination bases, and artillery storage hubs remained out of reach. The existing FPV drones could only fly about 10 miles. Cruise missiles, while powerful, were too costly to use in large numbers. That's where the FP-2 came in. At 105 kilograms of payload and a 200-kilometer reach, it was designed to fill the mid-range gap between the front lines and deep Russian territory. The FP-2's modular design meant it could be produced quickly, using existing FP-1 manufacturing lines, allowing Ukraine to scale production without major new infrastructure. Its impact was immediate. By combining AI-guided navigation and optional manual control, the FP-2 gave operators the flexibility to strike both stationary and moving targets. In practice, this meant Ukraine could now hit Russia's logistic arteries, the warehouses, supply trains, and refueling points that fed its soldiers. This wasn't just another weapon, it was a strategy shift. For 2 years, Russia had relied on its vast industrial advantage to replenish lost tanks, fuel, and artillery faster than Ukraine could destroy them. Now, those replacement pipelines were under siege. Each FP-2 strike meant not just a physical hit, but a logistical one. Every warehouse burned meant weeks of supply chaos, and every fuel truck destroyed left Russian armor stranded. The FP-2 also carried symbolic power. It demonstrated that innovation could level the playing field. For every billion Russia spent, Ukraine could counter with a fraction of that, sometimes just a few tens of thousands. As 2025 progressed, Western analysts began calling this shift the democratization of destruction. BBC correspondents noted that Ukraine has turned warfare into software, while Defense News reported that the FP2 symbolizes a battlefield where agility beats abundance. But the full effect of this drone wasn't just in its design, it was in how it changed the rhythm of war itself. Russian troops once thought safety began 60 miles behind the front. Now, nowhere was safe. The question was no longer if Ukraine could strike Russia's supply chains, it was how often and how devastatingly it could do so. By late October 2025, the stage was set. Russia had begun consolidating its logistics hubs deep inside occupied territory, confident they were beyond the reach of Ukraine's FPV drones. But at dawn on November 2nd, that illusion shattered. The Security Service of Ukraine, the SBU, launched its first combat mission using FP2 drones. The operation, codenamed Thunderstep, was led by Ukraine's elite Alpha Special Forces, known for covert, high-precision missions. Their targets? 3 Russian supply depots across Luhansk and Donetsk, each critical to Moscow's winter offensive plan. At 4 a.m., one FP2 lifted off from a mobile truck platform concealed beneath a camouflage net. Operators keyed in GPS coordinates and the drone climbed to 800 meters, cruising at 140 miles per hour. 2 more followed. Within minutes, the drones crossed 90 miles of occupied land undetected. At 4:37 a.m., the first impact hit a Russian fuel storage near Dovzhansk. The explosion sent fireballs spiraling into the night sky, cutting off supplies for more than 3,000 troops in the sector. Moments later, the second FP2 dove into a warehouse near Roskishna. Footage released by the SBU showed a direct hit, a split-second flash followed by a rolling shockwave. The third strike obliterated a logistics center near Svatove, home to ammunition reserves used to shell Kharkiv. Within an hour, 3 key nodes of Russia's eastern supply chain were gone. Russian telegram channels went silent, then erupted with confusion. Unidentified UAVs, possible NATO interference, one message read. Another simply said, they came from nowhere. By morning, Russian war bloggers were posting videos of the infernos, blaming internal sabotage or Western experimental weapons. Moscow's Ministry of Defense issued a vague statement claiming minor damage, but satellite imagery told a different story. Massive black scars where supply compounds once stood. Ukraine's move was calculated. Rather than attacking troops directly, Kyiv targeted the arteries feeding them. Fuel, ammunition, and command communications. Within 48 hours, Russian frontline units in Luhansk began reporting fuel shortages and stalled convoys. A single FP2 raid had paralyzed entire brigades. Then came November 3rd. Euromaidan press confirmed another wave. This time, 2 FP2 strikes on Luhansk's industrial belt. One hit a refueling terminal, the other, a storage depot filled with lubricants and spare parts. Russian logistics collapsed further. Satellite data showed a chain of abandoned trucks along the M04 highway, stretching for 18 kilometers. Western analysts called it Ukraine's drone blitzkrieg. Defense News reported that Moscow's logistical heartbeat was faltering under precision, low-cost attacks. But Ukraine didn't stop. Over the next 72 hours, dozens of FP2s and FPV drones coordinated strikes across occupied Donbass. Operators used both autonomous and manual control, synchronizing attacks to maximize confusion. Russian radar systems, calibrated for larger missiles, struggled to detect the small, fast-moving drones. By November 5th, Ukrainian intelligence confirmed over $480 million worth of Russian assets were destroyed in 4 days. The Kremlin's response was panicked. Military commanders demanded more air defense systems. Factories in Tula and Bryansk switched overnight to producing anti-drone weaponry. Yet the real threat wasn't just physical, it was psychological. For the first time, Russian soldiers realized that distance no longer meant safety. Videos from inside Russian bases showed troops covering vehicles with tarps, turning off radios, and sleeping in trenches. A viral post on Telegram read, "They see everything. Even in the dark, even when we think we're safe." The FP2 had done more than destroy warehouses. It shattered the illusion of control. And as Russian forces scrambled to adapt, Ukraine unleashed the next phase, gamified warfare. The Brave 1 system rewarded drone units with points for successful hits. Operators competed like gamers in a virtual leaderboard, using their points to buy better drones and upgrades. By September, over 400 units were part of this system, responsible for eliminating more than 18,000 Russian troops and destroying 1,200 armored vehicles, according to data verified by multiple Western outlets. The message to Russia was clear. Ukraine's drone army wasn't just fighting, it was evolving. And evolution always beats tradition. The FP2 didn't just rewrite battlefield tactics, it upended the economics of war itself. Analysts across Europe began calling it the $55,000 nightmare, a symbol of how innovation could bankrupt a superpower faster than any sanction. Each FP2 strike cost Ukraine less than the price of a single Russian tank tire, yet the damage it inflicted reached into the millions. According to the Laue Institute, Ukraine's earlier Operation Spiderweb, a series of drone raids launched from hidden trucks, destroyed or disabled 1/3 of Russia's strategic bomber fleet in 2024, causing losses exceeding $7 billion. Those drones cost only $400 each. The FP2 now brought that efficiency to the mid-range war zone, giving Ukraine a financial weapon as powerful as any missile. Western think tanks have begun quantifying the imbalance. A Reuters report from October 2025 estimated that for every dollar Ukraine spends on drone warfare, Russia loses between $200 and $500 in destroyed assets, infrastructure, and fuel. A ratio so lopsided it's been labeled the asymmetry of ruin. Economically, this comes at the worst possible time for Moscow. Russia's war budget ballooned to $160 billion in 2025, consuming nearly a quarter of its national GDP. Inflation is climbing above 15%, while the ruble continues to slide past 120 per US dollar. During a St. Petersburg Economic Forum in June, Russian Minister of Economic Development Maxim Reshetnikov admitted that business confidence is collapsing and warned that the country was teetering on the edge of recession. Yet President Vladimir Putin insists this stagnation is part of a strategic plan. Few believe him. Western intelligence reports suggest the Kremlin is quietly raiding pension reserves and sovereign wealth funds to keep its defense industry afloat. Meanwhile, Ukraine, despite devastating losses, has turned necessity into innovation, producing a steady stream of drones through decentralized, privately funded workshops across Kyiv, Lviv, and Dnipro. The contrast couldn't be sharper. Russia burns cash to build steel. Ukraine builds code. Firepoint's production model mirrors that of Silicon Valley startups. Standardized components, modular designs, and AI-assisted assembly lines have allowed the company to scale up to several hundred FP2 units per month. Each drone can be customized for mission type, autonomous strikes, manual guidance, or even stealth payloads designed to jam radar. At the same time, Ukraine's use of cost-effective systems helps it withstand financial strain. According to The Guardian, the European Union has been considering a $157 billion loan package funded by seized Russian assets to stabilize Kyiv's economy. Still, with interest rates rising and Western aid debated in Washington, cost-effective innovation like the FP2 has become Ukraine's best hedge against exhaustion. From a military perspective, the FP2's success has reshaped doctrine. It transformed Ukraine's drone strategy into a layered offense. Long-range drones like FP1 hit deep inside Russia. FP2s dominate mid-range supply routes. FPV drones swarm frontline armor and infantry. This multi-tiered system mirrors NATO's air defense philosophy, but in reverse. An air offense grid built on affordability and adaptability. As Defense News wrote in September, Ukraine has inverted the logic of deterrence. What used to protect is now used to disrupt. But the impact goes beyond military calculus. Inside Russia, economic fatigue is breeding social unrest. Fuel shortages have led to rationing in cities like Belgorod and Kursk. Factories once producing consumer goods now churn out drone parts and artillery shells. Labor protests are rising, with regional governors pleading for federal aid to pay workers' salaries. Even the once calm middle class in Moscow and St. Petersburg feels the pinch. With imported goods disappearing and power cuts increasing, the Kremlin's narrative of total control is cracking. The FP2 isn't just striking targets, it's striking nerves. At the same time, the moral dynamic of the war is shifting. Each FP2 attack filmed from onboard cameras circulates globally within hours. Millions watch these videos not just as warfare, but as digital justice. Ukraine hitting back at an invader using intellect over intimidation. For the United States and its allies, the FP2's success validates a growing consensus. The future of warfare lies in low-cost, high-impact autonomy. Pentagon insiders have reportedly requested technical briefings from Ukraine's Ministry of Digital Transformation, exploring how decentralized manufacturing could integrate into US drone doctrine. Strategically, this moment signals a turning point. Russia's colossal army, built for attrition, is now bleeding money, morale, and mobility. Ukraine, fueled by ingenuity and supported by a fragmented but resilient economy, is proving that technology, not territory, defines modern power. And behind the data and explosions, a single truth emerges. Whoever masters the algorithm wins the war. By winter 2025, the war in Ukraine had evolved into something larger. A live laboratory shaping the doctrines of every major military power on Earth. What began as a regional conflict had become a global test of technology, economics, and willpower. Inside NATO's headquarters in Brussels, military planners pored over footage of Ukraine's FP2 strikes, analyzing every flight pattern and explosion signature. A confidential report leaked in October described the FP2 as a model for cost-efficient deterrence. In other words, NATO sees in Ukraine's drones the future of warfare. A future where intelligence, not industrial mass, dominates the battlefield. For the United States, now under President Donald Trump's second administration, the debate is sharper than ever. Washington's relationship with Kyiv has become transactional. Continued military aid in exchange for strategic access and exclusive tech-sharing rights. Pentagon officials view Firepoint's modular system as a potential game-changer for future proxy conflicts, particularly in the Pacific, where swarms of small AI-powered drones could offset China's numerical advantage. Meanwhile, Europe faces its own reckoning. Germany, France, and Poland have begun investing in their own drone walls along NATO's eastern border. Berlin's defense minister recently admitted that Ukraine's battlefield has accelerated Europe's rearmament by a decade. European firms from Lithuania to Spain are racing to replicate Ukraine's agile production model, often hiring displaced Ukrainian engineers as consultants. And then there's China. Beijing's analysts are quietly studying Ukraine's success to refine their own asymmetric tactics. Chinese cargo ships have been rumored, though not confirmed, to test container-based drone launch systems inspired by Kyiv's Operation Spiderweb. Defense observers warn that what Ukraine created out of necessity could be reverse-engineered into an exportable doctrine for other nations. In the Middle East, too, the FP2's shadow looms large. Iran has already deployed swarms of its Shahed drones in regional conflicts. But even Tehran strategists are astonished by Ukraine's hybrid model, one that merges military precision with civilian innovation. A Defense News report from November noted that Ukrainian engineers had achieved military-grade lethality on a startup budget, a phrase that has since become a mantra for Western defense startups. The broader geopolitical implication is staggering. Wars are no longer defined by geography, but by bandwidth. Whoever controls the data controls the front, and Ukraine, through tools like FP2, Brave 1, and the gamified army of drones, has turned its entire defense ecosystem into an adaptive network powered by real-time intelligence. Consider the global balance sheet of this conflict. Russia's 2025 military spending reached $160 billion, while Ukraine's total defense outlay, including Western aid, remained under $45 billion. Yet satellite imagery and battlefield reports indicate Ukraine destroyed over $30 billion in Russian hardware this year alone. That 3-to-1 efficiency ratio has forced NATO strategists to reimagine deterrence. The old formula, bigger arsenal equals more power, is dead. In its place comes scalable lethality, where one nation's small innovation can neutralize an entire superpower's offensive capacity. In Washington, defense contractors are taking notes. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Northrop Grumman have all initiated R&D programs based on Ukrainian-style drone swarming and self-repairing networks. Pentagon officials even referenced the FP2 program during a classified congressional hearing in September, citing it as proof that lethality can now be mass-produced. Meanwhile, Trump's administration faces political pressure at home. Skeptics question why billions of US dollars are still flowing to Ukraine, even as the White House insists that Kyiv's success serves America's strategic interest by draining Russian resources without US troops in harm's way. The president himself called Ukraine's FP2 campaign a hell of a good deal for American taxpayers, sparking both applause and outrage on Capitol Hill. Beyond politics, the humanitarian angle is impossible to ignore. Every Ukrainian innovation, every cheap drone, every creative countermeasure emerges from necessity born of suffering. Nearly 8 million Ukrainians remain displaced. The nation's GDP, though recovering, is still down 35% from pre-war levels. Yet amid this hardship, Ukraine's digital economy continues to grow, powered by defense startups that blur the line between civilian and military tech. That resilience has become a model for the 21st century, a nation fighting not just with weapons, but with ideas. Across Asia, smaller nations are watching closely. Taiwan's defense ministry recently commissioned a study titled The Ukraine Algorithm, exploring how Kiev's layered drone strategies could be adapted for island defense. In Tel Aviv, Israeli military scientists are examining Ukraine's gamified system as a way to train autonomous operators without costly live exercises. Even Japan's self-defense forces have quietly begun experimenting with modular drone units inspired by Firepoint's FP2 design. What began as a desperate act of survival is now rewriting global defense economics. And if the next conflict erupts somewhere else, perhaps in the South China Sea or the Persian Gulf, the ghost of Ukraine's FP2 will be there, hovering unseen, guiding the world into a new era of algorithmic warfare. The FP2 began as a battlefield experiment, a stopgap weapon built from necessity, born out of desperation. Yet within months, it has become something much larger, a symbol of modern resilience, innovation, and the death of industrial warfare as the world once knew it. When the first FP2 took flight over the burning horizon of Luhansk, few in Moscow or Washington understood what they were witnessing. Today, no one doubts it. A $55,000 drone assembled in secret workshops across Ukraine is reshaping global military doctrine. Each successful strike isn't just a tactical victory, it's a declaration that ingenuity has eclipsed sheer might. For Ukraine, the stakes remain existential. Its economy is strained, its population weary, and yet its creativity is thriving. The FP2 represents not just a tool of war, but a blueprint for survival, proving that a smaller nation can outthink and outmaneuver a global superpower. For Russia, the implications are devastating. The Kremlin now faces a war of attrition it cannot win, not through firepower, nor propaganda, nor sheer numbers. The psychological damage runs even deeper. Russian commanders now admit privately that no rear area is safe. Every night brings new explosions, unseen drones, and the creeping fear of invisible eyes in the sky. What was once an orderly war of fronts has become a chaotic battlefield of code, circuits, and constant adaptation. Meanwhile, across the world, military strategists and defense ministers are scrambling to adapt. NATO is drafting new doctrines centered on autonomous deterrence. The United States is embedding Ukrainian-style swarm logic into its next-generation drone fleets. Even China and Iran, often on opposite ends of global power politics, are converging on the same lesson. The era of trillion-dollar militaries is over. The next superpower won't be the one with the most soldiers or tanks, but the one with the fastest algorithms. And yet, as 2026 looms, the greatest question remains unanswered. Can Ukraine sustain this technological edge while its economy bleeds and Western aid wavers? Will Russia's collapsing war machine finally force the Kremlin to the negotiating table? Or will desperation push Moscow into even riskier escalation? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, when algorithms and machines fight wars, what becomes of humanity's control over the battlefield itself? As the smoke clears over Luhansk and the charred remains of Russia's supply lines fade from satellite feeds, one truth stands clear. This is not the end of war. It is merely the beginning of a new kind, one written not in steel and fire, but in code and light. If you found this story revealing, subscribe to MC Media for more in-depth reports on global conflicts, defense technology, and the future of warfare. The next chapter is already unfolding, and it may change the world faster than anyone expected.